Welcome to the Less Stressed Life podcast. This is your host, Krista Bigler, private practice integrative nutritionist, helping people across the U.S. reverse digestive issues, eczema, and autoimmunity via phone and video consult. To learn more, visit lessstressednutrition.com. Now, on to the show. Okay, so today on the Less Stressed Life, we have Charity Lighten, which sounds like such a happy name. So Charity holds her master's in nutrition science. She's passionate about gut health, sourdough bread, her faith, family, and she's the co-founder of Silver Fern brand, a company we'll talk about a little bit later, that specializes in my favorite spore-based probiotics, whole food nutrients, and products for kids and more. So welcome, Charity.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a fun little, my morning time this morning was really kind of checking you out online and learning a lot more about your background. And so it's kind of fun. And we've talked before and had a great time kind of getting to know each other a little bit. But you it hasn't been too many years you started this supplement brand and company. And we'd like to know a little bit more about the background. How does that happen? Who is Charity? And tell us a little bit more about you and how you got in this industry.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I kind of feel like I have parallel worlds. It's really quite bizarre because I did not begin this journey with this end in mind at all. In fact, my bachelor's degree is in accounting, like totally different field of study. And then to be honest, after I graduated, I had baby. So like 4 little kids, all under the age of 6. That was kind of my life for a while. I loved business. I always had little businesses on the side. Very little known fact about me is I had like an eBay store where I would buy buy carpets, mostly like Pottery Barn carpets, and sell them on eBay. I got my real estate license. I had a tax business. I mean, just random little things to kind of keep my brain engaged while I was raising all of my babies. And then it's been almost 10 years ago. I just kind of had this feeling that I needed to delve just a little bit more in nutrition. And Chris, if I'm being like totally honest with you, that came from a pretty vain place. I was always the type of girl that would do anything to be skinny. It wasn't something that came easily or naturally to me. And so that was really where I first started thinking, oh my gosh, I just want to be skinny and I'll do anything and I'll try anything. And I really remember I actually had a fairly profound spiritual experience where this almost voice, I'm just going to say it, like voice came into my mind, and it was like, Charity, when you are ready to be healthy and not just skinny, there are things that I have to teach you. So that's kind of where my journey began. But I don't want to bore like all your listeners. Like, should I go into like the next steps after that?
No, I think that's good because I'm guessing there's a lot of people listening that either have clients that exactly like your story. That story is really not different from a lot of women's stories, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even in my background, the percentage of people that are in this, we're both in nutrition world, right? But the percentage of people that come into this industry come into it sometimes for the wrong reasons initially, right? Just because exactly like what you said. And, I think awareness is the biggest thing. So shedding some awareness on that is great. Give us the next thing that happened for you.
So next thing was I delved in, like feet first, head first, everything first. I studied and studied and studied. I became certified. I started teaching classes. I became very, very compelled by all the literature that talked about disease prevention. That's really what my passion was, disease prevention through nutrition. And I started teaching classes, particularly cancer prevention through nutrition. I was what was called a food for life instructor. And I became very, very passionate about just spreading the message of like, take care of your bodies, blah, blah, blah. And decided that I wanted to delve even further, get my master's in nutrition science. And that's kind of the trajectory of my life until August 17th of 2015. And that was probably the darkest day of my life. And my sweetheart, the love of my life, we had been married for almost 20 years, came to me after a colonoscopy and said, honey, I have colon cancer. Gosh, like even just saying it, it's hard. It was a hard time. We found out 2 days later that it had already spread to his lungs and to his liver. And so I finally, I felt some clarity in a really weird, bizarre way that I had almost somewhat been prepared. I mean, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but this I had been prepared in many different ways. So cancer became our journey, our fight. And gosh, it's October 16th, 2018. And he is a miracle and we're fighting still. I sure would love to say, oh yeah, he's in remission and there's no tumors, but that's not the case. He's not in remission and there still are tumors, but we live a very amazing, abundant life, and cancer is at the forefront of our everyday. And we just have different ways that we're trying to fight it and trying to deal with it. Maybe that's a discussion, for another day, but so disease kind of became part of my platform also. And as part of the platform of disease came this inquisition of, where does disease start? And I am not going to stand here and say I have the answer to that, but I have clues. And I feel like the clues are from Hippocrates, all disease starts in the gut. And so a passion for gut health and all that means and how the gut affects the body and the microbiome and, all of those things kind of led into my passion for probiotics. And now I have a supplement company, which is really not something that I thought would have been part of my journey, but something that I'm really, really passionate about. And as you know, and I know you've talked to your listeners before about probiotics and spore-based probiotics, but I feel like they are a really, really important part of managing a gut that's being attacked daily by things that are in our control and things that are not in our control. So that's kind of a long introduction to kind of how Silver Fern and just a little bit about my story.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to highlight a few things. So one, you're right. It's probably important to make that distinction. Spore-based probiotics are different than regular probiotics. If people want to get kind of the whole picture of that, they can listen to the episode, Forget Everything You Know About Probiotics. Charity partners with.
Such a good one.
Yeah, she listened to it as well. And so anyway, we can talk more about that at the end and kind of how that all wraps together. And then two, thank you for sharing your story that's not easy for you to share about your husband and your personal life. And just side note, colon cancer being one of the I think 4 screenable cancers. So really, I guess speaks to, hey, it's really great to have some screening done, right? Because things can sneak up on you. So, I mean, not even, our body, speaking of clues, our body gives us clues. And men, I mean, we all kind of put our health to the side until we've got bleeding arms, basically. Mm-hmm. And so we're always taking care of everyone else before ourselves typically, which just kind of transitions nicely into the whole mom thing. So as a mom of 4, earlier before you were saying you were doing some jobs to keep your brain engaged, and I know how that is, and you want to have fulfillment and whatnot. And so we were talking a little bit off air about brain fog and mom stuff and brain and gut health. And so I think today you were wanting to share a little bit about gut and brain health. Is that right?
Yeah. It's just such a fascinating connection. For so long we thought that a lot of the communication went from the brain to the gut. And what we now know is that's actually not the case. Most of kind of that connection goes from the brain to the gut. And so, with that in play, there's just been a lot of research done on, okay, well, what does that mean? How does the gut actually affect the brain? And one very, I don't know, buzzword, that's what I'll say, buzzword that's been going around is leaky gut. And, I'm sure your audience is very, very familiar, but it's just the idea that, these tight junctions or your gut's not kind of keeping everything inside that it should. Well, one of those elements is something called LPS, lipopolysaccharides. They're from gram-negative bacteria that when they stay within your gut, they're really quite harmless. The problem is we're finding this LPS showing up in places that it shouldn't show up. One of those quite damaging places is the brain. In fact, we now know that LPS, when it is released through a leaky gut, can cross the blood-brain barrier. That's a scary thing, right? There's not many things that can do that. But unfortunately, LPS can cross into the brain. So one interesting study, let me see if I can find it. This was February of this year, and this was published in the Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience. It talks about LPS and how it is associated with amyloid plaque. Well, the reason that is should be a red flag for anybody is that amyloid plaque is one of the conditions of Alzheimer's disease. So what's fascinating is that this LPS, there's a few things we know about it. Throughout the body, there's these things called toll-like receptors, and we know that LPS attaches to, it's called TLR4. And when it attaches, it basically mediates the increase of cytokines or inflammatory things in the body when that connection happens. Well, here's what's really, really interesting is that the brain has obviously brain cells, but there's certain cells in the brain that are part of the immune system. Like, that's not something I ever knew. I don't know. I was like, I had no idea that there's specific cells, and they're called microglia cells that are in the brain that are part of the immune system. And these cells are really, really sensitive, and they're working all the time to kind of protect the brain. Well, here's the interesting part. These particular cells have TLR4 receptors. And so we now know that this LPS that's traveling from a leaky gut into the brain is actually triggering inflammation in the brain. And inflammation in the brain leads to amyloid plaque production, which, as we mentioned before, is one of the characteristics of Alzheimer's. So just this idea, like, I used to kind of roll my eyes just a little bit with I don't know, gut health things. But the more I learn, the more I go, wow, this is a really, really important topic that people need to understand. One other element that's really interesting is mood brain disorders. I've got 4 teenagers now. My 4 babies are not babies anymore. And I am tremendously saddened and shocked by the increase of both anxiety and depression, but also suicide among this age group in our society. And so you go, like, what's going on? And again, like, I'm not gonna stand here and go, I have all the answers. But I hypothesize that one of the elements, certainly not all of the elements, but one of the elements could be the fact that the gut is being absolutely annihilated by external factors. One of those being glyphosate. And I know that you and Kron had the most intelligent conversation on glyphosate. So I'm not going to go into that, but absolutely, your listeners should go back. Do you know that episode number, Krista?
I don't, but it's called Forget Everything You Know About Probiotics.
Yeah. So such a good one. So I won't get into that. But this interesting neurotrophins are these growth factors in the brain, okay? And they lead to the healthy development of and survival of neurons in the brain. Well, some interesting studies found that this there's this something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So BDNF. And this protein has been heavily associated with depression and suicide. There's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that depression is actually associated with this reduced brain BDNF levels. And so you kind of go, well, why does that matter? Well, along those same lines is something called cognitive reactivity. And this just simply... That's a very, very fancy way of saying, okay, how well do people deal with dysphoria or this idea of dissatisfaction with their life? So they can study different people and go, okay, and give them a score of this cognitive reactivity. But basically, it's like, how well can they deal with difficult things? And so these types of studies have been done, and what's really fascinating is that there are some interesting studies on probiotic supplementation. And what they have found is that those that have been supplemented with probiotics show a significantly reduced overall cognitive reactivity to sad moods or high pressure situations or anxiety. So this, again, it's kind of a boring scientific way of saying, like, what's going on inside of our gut has a tremendous impact of what's going on inside of our brain. I'm also really, really intrigued by addiction. I've got a long line of family history of alcohol addiction. And so that's another thing that's quite interesting. GABA is produced in the gut. And a healthy gut can produce a healthy amount of GABA. And here's why that's interesting. GABA has an interesting way of letting the brain kind of let go of, let's say, addictive behaviors or addictive thoughts. And without GABA, letting go of those is really quite difficult. So all of these things are just kind of interconnected with the importance of keeping your gut really healthy. There was something really interesting published today. Let me see if I can find. This was published, let's see. This is more in a newsletter. I'll have to find the actual study. But the newsletter talks about new research associating probiotics with brain fogginess. Now, this is where I get a little bit defensive. So I hope it's okay if I kind of go on the defense here. And this is, what we've talked about, spore-forming probiotics. So there's a lot of things in the news that I've noticed lately, and I'm sure the reason I've noticed is because of my company. But a lot of things kind of bashing probiotics. Mm-hmm. So this particular article talked about those taking probiotics had an increase in brain fogginess. Well, there's an actual reason why that brain fogginess is occurring, and that's because a lot of these probiotic bacteria are being released in the small intestine, and in the small intestine they produce D-lactic acid, which is linked to brain fogginess. Well, here's why that's of interest to me, because a truly good probiotic should not be released in the small intestine. It should be released in the large intestine. And that's why those spore-based probiotics are so critical, because they actually go through that kind of very harsh environment of the gastric system. They get down to the large intestine where they're released. And on that note, a totally other side tangent, when they're released in the proper space, which is actually the large intestine, that's where short-chain fatty acids are produced. And we know that those short-chain fatty acids also have an impact on the brain. So really just it just feels like it's full circle. When we talk about this gut-brain connection, it really is, okay, in order to take care of the brain, we need to take care of the gut. And luckily there's things that people can do.
Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of summarize some of that whole full circle thing again, because that's a beautiful aha moment. I always want people to stop by here and say, I learned something. I love it. So we were talking about how gut health influences amyloid plaque, which influences Alzheimer's, right? So now we have some really, really basic science on how that works, right? And how the microglia cells in the brain are part of the immune system. Like, who knew that there was brain cells that are part of the immune system, right? Big deal, right? And that makes sense since our immune system is largely in our gut as well. It all comes around together. We talked about mood disorders with anxiety, and you're right. That is like awful and saddening that anxiety, depression, suicide are so elevated, and how brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, or reduced BDNF, is associated with depression, which is really related to gut health as well. And then you also talked about small, like the brain fog, and we talked about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which really has been a condition that's been out for about 10 years. Maybe your doctor doesn't know what it is yet. It does take a long time for kind of current research to hit kind of everywhere mainstream. So you did a beautiful job of kind of talking about some of the issues with this. Is where a broad study that kind of puts everything into one umbrella, right? So all of probiotics are not created equal, right? Every strain has different benefits. Some strains are actually not incredible. Some are really fantastic. Some do different things, right? All of that is really, really relevant. And so I like how you brought that in and talked about how how important it was for probiotics to get to the large intestine. So I have a little story about that. We've all probably done something like this, right? If we've tried probiotics, or people say, I tried probiotics, I didn't feel a difference, right? And I will say that I think this is where it's important to kind of make that distinction of spore-based versus conventional probiotics. There are, typical probiotics that also make it to the large intestine, some particular strains. But I will tell you a little story. When my oldest daughter was very young, and we knew about gut health, but we really thought gut health was just probiotics, and we didn't know the difference between them. My husband used to open a capsule and spread it on her toast and say, "Don't tell mom, this is the most important ingredient." He was fantastic with reverse psychology. And in retrospect, I don't know how much of that actually got anywhere, right? Like, did it just get to the stomach acid and get killed? Did it just stop there, right before the small intestine, or just barely, get to that point? Whereas with spore-based probiotics, I don't have to worry about that now, which is nice, right? Or if I know my strains. And so that's kind of another piece that maybe you want to share with us.
Yeah. I mean, so it's so hard, Krista. Like, I have such empathy for the amount of confusion that's out there. Like, I get it. There's 6 kids in my family. There's 7 kids in my husband's family. So I have, family conversations, and it's kind of like, well, how are you supposed to know? There's so much information. And the really hard thing, I mean, one thing that was devastating to me when I was getting my master's degree was that I literally could find conflicting studies both published by reputable sources that had like opposite outcomes. Like, that's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, I get the confusion that's out there. And so for me, I try to offer some clarity when you're looking to buy a probiotic. Now, the first thing I should say is I actually do believe probiotics are beneficial. So BBC came out with this study last month. I shouldn't say a study. It was more an article, and the title was Probiotics Deemed Useless. And as I read through it, I was like, yes. Like, I wasn't angry by the study. I'm like, yes, all of these strains we know are useless. That's part of our story. That's why we don't use those strains in the Silver Fern brand. That's why we've gone to these spore-based probiotics that Karan talked about, which we are one of the very few that white label from Karan. I mean, he's a dear friend, and I'm grateful that he has been the one to bring these spores here. So the idea that all probiotics are created equal it makes me cringe, because I'm like, they're really, really not. Like, for example, I used to spend the money, I would get refrigerated probiotics because I thought, well, if it's living, it must be superior. But now I simply explain to people, listen, if it is refrigerated, it means it can't survive room temperature. So what in the world's going to happen as soon as the stomach acids hit that, or the bile salts, or the pancreatic enzymes? Like, there's no way that it's going to survive. And so here's the simple answer. People can look for a probiotic that, one, is spore-based, or they call them sporebiotics. Number 2 has been DNA verified, which basically means, unfortunately, supplements got kind of a bad rap a while ago, where what was on the label when third-party testing came along was not actually what was inside the bottle. So it's important to have third-party, we have third-party testing that's verified that what's on our label is actually inside of our bottle. So it can at least give people, they can rest assured, okay, there's, some transparency there. And then the third thing is to make sure that it's been tested for survivability. Again, just so that it can make it to the large intestine, which is what we talked about. And as far as the kids go, like I said, I mean, I've got kids and you've got kids, and that's an important thing. So we just launched a children's probiotic, the only spore-based probiotic for kids. Our capsules, you can open them up and they're safe to give to kids, but most of my kids are like, yeah, no thanks. I'd rather just have a chewable that tastes like a Smartie. And yes, they're teenagers and they still act like children. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are a few things that people can do.
So you're saying that could work for your husband that acts like a child as well? Smartie
yes. In fact, I was fighting with my team on the label to put kids probiotics, and then in parentheses put for dads too. And they're like, no, people will get confused. I was like, okay, fine. We don't need to put that on there.
But that's what we wanted. That in spirit, that's what goes on there.
Yes. That's exactly what we wanted. So probiotics, but you know what? I also want to give people other tips. Like, I don't want it to just be like, okay, that's the only thing you can do. There's other that people can do to improve their gut. So can we get into a few of those?
Absolutely. We'd love to.
Okay. So as a nutritionist, my biggest plea for people is fiber. Fiber. I mean, I say it all the time. I don't care what the latest craze diet, I don't care what diet you're on, just make sure you're getting enough fiber. And also, like, for me personally, like colon cancer, the studies linking people that have adequate amounts of fiber daily are significantly more protected against colon cancer. Like, that's a big deal. And to me, that's a simple thing to do. It's like what your grandmother always said, you know, eat your broccoli or eat your rice or whatever. Like, the whole foods that are in abundance in our country are often loaded with fiber. So I do get a little nervous when I hear different diets. Like, for example, I'll go there. The keto diet, for me, that's fine. Just please make sure you're getting enough fiber. And then those that aren't, there's supplements out there. We've got a great supplement called Tino. I put it in my smoothie. You can't taste it. It gives me 10 grams of fiber in 1 tablespoon. Like, that's just an easy way to do something for my gut. And, you know, prebiotics is another kind of buzzword. And we're working on a phenomenal prebiotic right now that, will be designed specifically to help feed healthy bacteria. But in the meantime, fiber is a great prebiotic. It feeds the healthy bacteria in our body. So that's one takeaway that people can have. Another takeaway is we know that the more diverse the microbiome, the better. So what's an actionable step that people can take in increasing their own diversity of their microflora? Well, studies show if they increase the variety of plant food that they consume. So we all get into a rut in the kitchen. I know I do, where I kind of make the same things over and over. Or like my kids, they like steamed broccoli, which lucky me, that's great. But that's an easy go-to, be like, oh, we'll just have steamed broccoli as the vegetable because I know my kids like it. So all I would encourage your listeners to do is maybe push that envelope just a little bit. Maybe have, carrots one night, or maybe have coleslaw or a mixed green salad, or have tomatoes and cucumbers one night. Just the idea of pushing against complacency and just trying to increase the plant variety in our diet, we know can have a fairly immediate effect on the diversity of our microbiome. So that's another thing we can do.
Right. Different fibers or different types of fibers from different foods promote different types of bacterial growth. So not having variety is kind of a problem, which is why I totally agree with everything you just said there. Everyone gets into these ruts. So that's why I love utilizing some of these things like CSAs or like kind of just grab bag baskets of different fruits and vegetables, because they force you to go use something that you probably weren't going to buy. That's
brilliant.
That's why
Such
I like that.
Point.
It's like, just surprise me and I'll make this happen,
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point. I've had those. You're like, oh man, now I got to use this eggplant. But yeah, that's so smart.
Yeah, exactly. Because it forces you to do something outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody go out and sign up for their local CSA. I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to add to that list? Because I thought that was beautiful.
Well, good. Yeah. And, there's just a few. I mean, there's simple things. Avoid the sugars, avoid the processed foods. Those things feed your bad bacteria. Those actually create more cravings in your brain anyway. I love the idea of having a pet too. Let me rephrase that, Krista. I do not like animals, and I'm not a pet person at all.
I like the idea of a pet though.
Right. But then my kids wore me down after about 8 years, and we got a dog. And I will say, I love our dog. I do love our dog, but I give myself extra little pats on the back, like bonus mom points, that we know having a pet does help with the diversity of our microbiome. So have a pet, or hug a pet, or even just have more human interaction. That actually shows, like, hugging more human interaction actually helps with the diversity of our gut. So yeah, just little things that people can do.
Yeah, I love those little tidbits, because they're kind of like make some people kind of bristle a little bit. And you're right, like the microbiome's everywhere. So just so you know, when you give someone like, be careful who you hug, or maybe it's a good thing who you hug, so that way you get a little diversity all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. Help your body fight off the bad ones, I guess. But yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I love it.
So
That was really great. I think I like the dynamic here. We keep it moving and we deliver good stuff. So I liked your style here. So
good. I get very passionate. So sometimes it's just like word vomit. So I'm glad that you and I can kind of have this conversation together.
No, I loved it very much. So, finally, the question that kind of everyone gets is, if the person that's listening to this is thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like my uncle could benefit from this and I need this and some other things. Like, what's a parting, we'll talk about where people can find you online too, but what's your gut reaction? If you just wanted to share with people, like if they had to take one takeaway that they could do today to improve their overall gut health, to improve their brain health, like what's your thing you want to make sure that they get?
Yeah. So for me, I would say, it's going to sound like a broken record, but I would be like, tell your uncle, make sure 2 things: eat fiber and take a good quality probiotic, because they're simple. That's why, because they're simple, they're doable, and they will actually have a real impact. Some of the other stuff, like, you might not, I think people should have a water filter. I think those things are important. There's other things that we can do. But as far as what's the easiest thing, in my opinion, it's just eat some fiber, because it's not, people hate the idea of cutting things out. Like, I've worked with clients, and anytime you've got to cut something out, like that brings kind of emotion. But so I'm like, don't cut anything out. I'm saying add stuff in, add the fiber into your diet, eat more of that stuff. And then of course, take a good spore-based probiotic.
Mm-hmm. Good. And so speaking of spore-based probiotics, you're right. So you're one of the few companies that can white label our favorite spore biotics. And so let's talk about where people can find those. And I think you have a discount code.
Yes. Okay. So people can find them on our website, silverfernbrand.com. There's also some great information on the website, also on our Facebook page. I've got some great interviews with Karan on there. So we right now just sell in 2 places, just silverfernbrand.com and amazon.com. I personally am an Amazon junkie, I'll admit it. So like one click is fabulous for me. And then, yes, we will do a code. Just type in less stressed on the website and they'll get 20% off anything that they want to try out. We've got some, I didn't even talk about, our protein powder, which is the best out there because it's got probiotics and digestive enzymes in there. We've got some kids products. We've got an amazing enzyme. So yeah, lots of really, really great products that I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah. I like a whole food multivitamin, which we didn't get to talk about. But I'm a fan of a whole food multivitamin when possible. So.
Yes. So yeah. They can get on there and check it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so very much, Charity, for coming on, sharing some strategies for brain and gut health, and just kind of enlightening us today about that whole big circle.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on and giving me a little bit of a voice to something I'm quite passionate about.
Hey, I'm just popping in to give you my honest feedback. I received a box of Silver Fern's products yesterday that I paid for. I did not get for free. And it is so good. The chocolate is fantastic and it's sweetened with monk fruit. Their product, there you have a monk fruit product on their website. It's really, really delicious. So definitely all guilt-free, high quality, good dark chocolate. And then also I've got their protein powder, which is pea-based, but not gritty like most pea-based protein powders. It's a vegan protein powder. So it's like sacha inchi and some other seed base, but it's fantastic. So just giving you my honest 2 cents, it is really good. And it's kind of nice that they've got their favorite spore probiotics in the chocolate and the other products as well. So now I'm off to go try their little endurance formula before a workout. Hope that helps.
One of the best gifts you could give us at the Less Stress Life is your feedback. We are paid in podcast reviews. If you enjoyed this or any other episode, please leave us a review. In the iTunes store or from your podcast app, just search for Less Stress Life as if you're not already subscribed. Click on the banana face image, scroll to the bottom where it shows the text of other reviews, and write a review. While you're there, hey, make sure you hit subscribe. For Android or Stitcher users, you gotta go to the desktop site and search for Less Stress Life, and then scroll down to leave a review. Stitcher doesn't load Apple reviews on their site, so if you want, you can leave a review in both places. Your feedback means a lot to the success of the show. Thanks so much for taking the time to do that. You rock.